Well, hello everybody. First of all, I wanted to just thank you for your patience and waiting for these videos to come out. My mother-in-law passed away this week, and it's been a little bit more hectic than usual, and just haven't been able to crank out the videos like I'd like to. And this is the first time I'm using this textbook for the course, so I'm having to create everything fresh this semester. So they're going to come out a little bit more rapidly now and more on schedule. So before I got started here, I just wanted to say that and assure you that we'll get things caught up and get you all up to speed as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So what I want to do in this video is I want to show you a little bit different example from what's in the chapter. I tend to not like to just do exactly what the book does because you can already go through and follow that yourself. And I like to cover the material, but just do it maybe in a little bit different way, hopefully a way that's simpler and easier to follow, but you can be the judge of that here. But what I want to do is go through a program that teaches you the concepts from chapter 2. We're not going to do we're not going to do every little detail in the chapter, but we'll cover the main things. And so what I've got here is a program. It's a web page that calculates the cost of a meal, and it has some business rules associated with it. First off, if you notice here, you enter the customer's age and the price of a meal, and what it does is it calculates the cost, but it gives you a discount if you're under 10 or over 60. And in fact, if you're under 10, you get 20% off. If you're over 60, you get 10%, and if you're over 80, the meal is free. And so the way this works is you simply type in your age. So if I put in, age, and I put a price, will say $10, just to make the math simple, and hit submit, it calculates the cost of the meal. And as you can see here, if you're 30 and the meal is $10, there's no discount, and you're charged the full price. Now if I come back into the page fresh and I put in an age of 5 and I put a meal price of 100, as you can see, I'm given 20% off and the meal cost is 80. If I put in 85 at $100, I get the meal for free. And if I put in 75 at 100, I get a 10% discount. Now, the way I've set this up is I put in validation code, and so if you come in here and put an invalid age and hit submit, it puts up an error message that tells you the age must be between 1 and 120, and then it clears it out. Similarly, if you put a meal price that doesn't make sense, you're told that the price must be greater than 0, and again, you are required to re-enter it. Now, if you put gibberish in here, notice it says it detects if it's a number that's just out of range, or in other words, if you just enter gibberish, it tells you that it must be a valid number. So you either enter a number that's invalid, or you enter something that is not numeric, and it flags both conditions for you. But assuming you do everything right, you get the results. And notice here there are no submit buttons, there are no text boxes. This is just a presentation of data, and the only way to go back is to reload the page to get back to the original form where it comes up. Now, if you think about this web application, this page can display in one of 3 possible ways. The first way is that when it comes up fresh like this, nothing's been entered, it's brand new. That's one of the options, or one way the page can appear. The second way it can appear is when the user clicks submit and it comes back with the results. And everything is valid so that it can calculate those results without any problems. That's the second way. And then the third way it can come up is if you enter invalid data in either or both text boxes and hit submit, in which case you get an error message. So really there are three different modes that can come up in this document, and we have to handle each of the three conditions. And so what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to write the program for this, and we're going to work through this with keeping those three different states in mind as we go. So let's go ahead and build this program from scratch. So I'm going to go into IntelliJ, and I'm going to erase what's here so we can start fresh. So in IntelliJ, when I create a project, in this particular case, I called the project Lesson 2, and I created a web page called example1.php. And in the last video, we talked about how you do this. You basically hover over the page and hit a browser of your choice, and then it comes up and runs the page. So that's how the thing works. Now, first of all, let's talk about the condition where it just brings up a blank web page from scratch. And if that's the case, we're not going to be even thinking about PHP yet, because when the page comes up fresh, it's just HTML. So what I'm going to do is code up the HTML first. What would the page look like if it were just to come up fresh? And so what I'll do is I'll put in my head section. Example 1 is what I called it. And then I'm going to have my body section next. And in the body, I'm going to put an H1 header that says meal cost calculator. I'm going to put in a paragraph which tells the user what's going on and what they should do. And then I'm going to want to build a form. Now, the method of sending the data back to the server that we're going to use will be the post method. The action attribute, we want to post this page back to itself. Now, this is what's different with my example versus what's in the book. In the book, they have two different web pages. The first web page is the initial one, and it submits to the second page, which processes the data and renders a result. It's nice when you can combine all of that into one file, and so that's what I'm doing here. But in order to do that, I need to submit the web page back to itself, like this. Now that file name I put there works, but if I ever wanted to change the name of the file, so if I changed it, for instance, from example1.php back to index.php, I'd have to change the name here as well. There's a little trick you can use here, and what you do is you break into PHP mode for the information in between the quotes. So you see you got your opening quote here, and your closing quote there, and in between you're going to switch into the PHP mode, and what you're going to do is you're going to echo, and you're going to use a super global variable coming out of the server array, and that variable that you want is called php_self. So what we're doing is we're echoing a variable from the server superglobal array, and the index that we're using is php self, and so it's going to traverse the server array, go down to that particular index, and it's going to report back the contents of that element, which is going to be the file name of our web page. What's nice about this approach is that you don't ever have to change this. You can change the file name all you want to, but this particular section here on line 10 will never have to change. It's just one less thing you have to maintain down the road. So that's always a good thing to do. Now inside of the form, and again the book does this a little differently than I like to do it, I like to set up a table, and I know that purists frown on this because they don't like you to use tables for layout on a page, but I like to do this because it's just so much easier. So set up a table without a border, and I create several rows, and each row is 2 columns. The first column gives you what you're supposed to type in. The second column is where I put my text box. Now in PHP, remember that the input controls all have to have a name attribute set. In JavaScript, if you've used JavaScript before, you'll be familiar with the ID attribute. So JavaScript uses the ID attribute, PHP uses the name attribute. That's why sometimes web developers get into the habit of putting both the ID and the name in so that they have both bases covered. So there's my text box for the age. And then in my next row, we'll ask for the price of the meal, full price. And in this one, the next column, again, a text box. This name will be set to price. And my closing tag. Now I want my button next, but I want the button to span both columns. So I use col span. And inside of it, I want an input control of type submit. The value will be the word submit. So I've got my button. Now, if I run this page, there's my document. Oh, I should center that button. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to put an align center on that third row column so that that button is centered. I guess it doesn't really look much better than it did, but oh well, we'll just do that. Now, okay, so that's the basic, the first cut here. Now, so this is what's going to happen. When the user pushes the submit button, it's going to post back to the same page. So as you can see, when I clicked it, the address is the same. So what we need to do in our document here is we need to know why this page got refreshed. Or did it get loaded for the first time? As I said, there were 4 possible conditions for which you could be here. A fresh entry into the page, a submit with successful data, a submit with bad data. I said there were 4, actually there are 3. A clean refresh, entering in with submit with valid data, and entering a submit with invalid data. The second 2 conditions, if you come in and you type in good data and you click submit, or if you put in bad data and click submit, either way, you're coming in clicking the submit button. So we need to know when this page gets loaded up, are you here because you hit submit, or are you here because it's your first time into the page? Now one way that you can distinguish that is to put in your form a control of type hidden. And what you do is you set the name and you give it something that makes sense, like submitted, and then you set the value, and I'll put true for this. So this control is hidden, so the user won't see it. But when you submit the page back to the server, in your post array will be another element with a name value pair of submitted and true. So how do we use that? Well, this is how we use that. We come back up to the top here, and right at the very beginning, we enter PHP mode. And what we do is we check to see if the submitted element came through, which would mean that this condition would be true. In other words, the page gets loaded in fresh, okay? Or it gets loaded in because you hit submit. Either way, it gets loaded in. The very first thing we're going to do is do a test. We're going to use the filter input function, which the book gets into how to use. But what we do is we pass the first attribute into this function is input post, which means we want to go to the post superglobal array, and we want to look for an element whose index is named submit. And if we see that, then we want to know, is it equal to the word true? Notice true has quotes around it, and down here it has quotes. This is not a Boolean value true, this is a string. So we're testing here really for a string. If that string is equal to true, then we know that the reason we're coming in here to this code is because the user had hit the submit button. Well, what if they didn't hit the submit button? If they didn't hit the submit button, we don't want to do anything. We just want to show the page. Because if they didn't hit the submit button, they're coming in clean and fresh. And if that's the case, we want to show the page as you see it there. So there's nothing preloaded into it. It is completely fresh. Okay? So that takes care of one of our conditions. At this point, the first condition is met. They came in fresh, no problem. We have a way of determining, though, if they came in because they hit the submit button. And if they did, whatever we put in line 5 there will run. Well, what do we want to do in line 5? What we want to do is process what they've given us. If we come into line 5, that means they have hit submit. And if they have, we assume that they've got something to have us look at, namely the age and price. Now we can't guarantee that they've done that, but they hit submit. So they're telling us that they're good to go. Well, we have to verify that they really mean that. So what we need to do is take a look and see if the data looks good. Well, we can't test the data until we get it. So we have to get the values from the form first. Then we have to check to make sure, and there are two things we have to check. So the age, we have to make sure the age is valid, and we have to check to make sure the price is valid. Now, if both are valid, then we want to go ahead and calculate discount and adjusted price of the meal. And then we want to display the results. So those are the things we want to do if the user comes in and by clicking the submit button.